Hey there. All right. Well, we have now learned all the updates from the D23 Expo, many of them coming today at the parks panel from Bob Chapek and others. We've got new neighborhoods. We've got Moana, Mary Poppins, a lot of Avengers, and so much more. Some of it sounds great. Others, I guess we'll have to see. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks so much for joining me here on episode 80 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton, and I am recording this on the afternoon of August 25th. This is kind of a new approach that I'm taking just for this podcast to try and give as much as possible my immediate thoughts to the D23 Expo announcements that came mostly today at the big panel from Bob Chapek, but also we had some indications as early as Thursday night when the previews showed up for the Epcot, I wouldn't say model, but new parts of Epcot, plus some really cool retro posters with a few left out. That whole video to kind of give you a glimpse at the transformation of Epcot with some things missing was really cool. So I looked at it. I came into the weekend pretty optimistic. And the interesting thing today, just to talk in general about this, is that it's easy to look at what we didn't find out. I kept waiting. It was like we were building up to something happening with the Imagination Pavilion. I'll get a little more into that later, or a new country in Brazil. And I think Disney may have held a few things back. Now, the question is, did they hold it back for things going on in the news? Did they hold things back because they want to have more things to announce in the future? Whether at the Destination D event, which I assume would be next year, or just throughout the year to kind of keep the news cycle going. In a way, you don't want to announce everything you have. We saw this with the recent Universal announcement of their upcoming park. You don't want to give too much information in a way. And that was the case with certain things that were announced where they sounded great on the surface, but there were a lot of times where I thought, oh, would love to learn a little more about that, like Mary Poppins or some of the Avengers experiences we're seeing at DCA. But overall, I generally have pretty positive feelings about this. And I don't know if I was going in with a little too much dread about all of the talk about the historic transformation of Epcot, but a lot of it seems to be more with the look and feel of it. And I think that's great because one of my issues with how Epcot had gone over the years was as much about the coherence and the way it connected. So a lot of these changes seem to kind of go to putting together a theme. Now, we could dig further, and I will, into each of those themes and what they're doing, and if that is something we want to see. But at least overall, I generally don't have huge issues with a lot of what was presented today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically just go through maybe not every announcement ever. I don't know how much time I need to spend about the Disney stores in Target, for example, but at least go through a lot of the main theme park announcements with a focus on Epcot and really talk through just what I'm thinking about these and where I think they might go and just get my initial reactions. Now, this is going to be turned around very quickly. This podcast is going to be going out tomorrow on the 26th. So there may not be as much editing. You may hear a few pauses and ums and such, but I also think that's kind of good because it adds to just the idea that it's like basically if we saw those announcements and you and I went to a local bar, had a few drinks and sat down and just said, let's talk for a few hours and figure out what do we really think about this? What sounds cool? What sounds possibly a misstep? And where is Disney going in the future? And these are the questions that interest me today. So let's dive in. We're going to start with Epcot, but we're going to spend time all over the world talking about some of the changes and a lot of things we didn't hear at the D23 Expo. So here we go. Let's talk about a lot of Disney news. Let's start out by focusing on World Celebration, and I found it really interesting, more than in past D23 presentations, where Bob Chapek really went out of his way in the speech to circle back to fans. And it almost seemed like Disney, with everything with Epcot here, they really focused on saying things, whether it's lip service or not, that really connected with almost saying, we know you guys are concerned, but you'll be okay. Because personally, I was very nervous going into all this part about Epcot. When they were talking about DCA and the Avengers and things in Shanghai and Hong Kong, I was like, this is fun. Just kind of watching it. But when they started to talk about Epcot, I went, oh my gosh. It was like this little knot in my stomach appeared. And especially that was true when they started to talk about Spaceship Earth. Because you even saw the way that Bob Chapek said, Spaceship Earth, the iconic attraction, is staying. It's like they almost wanted to say, people don't freak out. And it was a really interesting way they talked about the change, because first they were like, we're going to have this really cool entrance with this fountain that's like the original fountain. They made sure to mention that. And they talked about, the history of Spaceship Earth, focusing on communications and technology. But now they are making significant changes. And I find it really interesting because now it's changing where they're talking about storytelling. And they showed us it's not something that is in like the Disney Parks blog post and such, but they did show some shots of the caveman scene and then of a few other scenes in the future, and tried to say that certain scenes are going to be staying. And there are certain scenes that really fit with storytelling. Like, for example, the scene that was the theater that originally then went to mathematics, the way that that's being presented, a lot of things like that could go to stories. Really, the first section does fit with storytelling still. And I'm not trying to justify the change. I just mean up through when you really start to see the pace of inventions. And even Chapek said that it's not as much about inventions. And they said there'd be some new scenes. And they showed an image that I have not studied, but that just looks stunning with an image of, I couldn't tell if it was people looking out over the water or something with space. And it just looked incredible. And now the big thing too, which I wonder how it'll actually work in practice, is the story light, which is something that they're going to use to tie it together. And I assume this is going to be some projection mapping that kind of follows you along as you kind of sets up the transition from scene to scene. That's also going to be interesting how this storytelling fits with, will we have a narrator in the way that we've had for the last four versions? I was actually assuming when he was saying there was something that tied together, he was going to mention, and we're going to have a narrator and possibly name who they are. Instead, they're talking about this magical light. So overall, I think this is a really positive thing from what we know at this time, and could lead to making Spaceship Earth stand the test of time for a really long time. Now, the question of storytelling is interesting, though, because you could really tie that into Disney storytelling and Disney characters. And while they did not mention anything like that, so I don't have any background about that, but as I think about it, you could go through the history and then eventually transition into a period where they show Mickey Mouse and show other Disney movies and characters. And actually, that seems fairly likely the more I think about it. Now, if it's done really well and doesn't lose the focus and doesn't turn into, hey, here's a bunch of scenes from Disney things, that could be great. But when you do change from technology to storytelling, you do open up opportunities like that, which if done well could be really interesting, something on par with like the Great Movie Ride, but more specific. But it is going to significantly change what Spaceship Earth is. I suspect they're going to do a great job, and I just hope that this pavilion continues to have a similar spirit. I know that the theme is changing, but even when it changed more from communications to technology, the spirit is still there beyond the descent. And that also makes me wonder if they're going to do anything with the descent. I really hope so. Even if it's just some really cool projection mapping, that would be a big improvement over what it is now. So on the backside of Spaceship Earth, there's going to be a new pavilion in a sense. You know, we had heard rumors about a beer garden being there, and that didn't really excite me that much, but I did not expect it to be on this level, where basically you have this 3-story, it's kind of like the festival pavilion, but it looks super futuristic and really fits with kind of the architecture of Spaceship Earth in a way. And while we're only going by concept art, I still don't really understand the middle expo level, where it looks like something you'd see on like ESPN College Football Game Day, but with Epcot in the back. I don't really get that at all, but still, the top appears to have a great view. Now, I wonder, too, if they're going to offer this upper level with amazing views. Is that going to be an upcharge, or is that a fast pass or something that... Because everybody's going to want to go up there to have views of the new Nighttime Spectacular. But in a sense, I think looking at the picture, and there appears to be kind of a winding stairwell to get inside of the second level, it looks like something that would fit wonderfully in Tomorrowland or Future World, has that right architecture. And I would rather see that, even if it's a festival pavilion, to be just a really comfortable space that's super inviting. We see so many trees, and that's the same way with the entrance. We're seeing all these trees and all this landscaping. And the area where you're getting this new view, they have this area called Dreamer's Point. And there's also going to be a statue of Walt Disney, which we saw kind of looking out there. And now this is a situation where I can see some old school fans being like, oh my gosh, Walt Disney's plan for Epcot the City was nothing like this. And I totally understand that. But I do, in a way, like the nod to Walt Disney, because at least it's a case where the company itself is taking another opportunity to recognize Walt Disney and to connect things they're doing to Walt. Whether or not they connect well, one of the tenets of the Tomorrow Society is we do not ask what Walt Disney would think, because I find someone saying, I just saw a message on Twitter about this, saying that, well, Walt Disney would not approve any of this. We have no idea. I'm not saying he would. I'm not saying he wouldn't. But the fact that Disney is recognizing Walt in another way with this statue in this gorgeous environment, I think that's good. I like that idea. And there's also this tree, which appears to be just this cool technology, which I don't entirely understand, the wishing tree. But in a sense, all of this, especially because, at least from what I can tell, this is not connecting to something that's an exact movie or TV show or something that's going to be out of date in a few years. This is a beautiful area, again, from the concept art, that looks like something that will be a cool hangout place. This is what I love about the Animal Kingdom, and I've talked about this before, is that I'm so interested in having a place that's so inviting and is more... I'm a rides guy. I love rides. But as I've gotten older and have gone with kids, the environment seems more important than ever. It seems like something that I want to be in a comfortable place, especially when it's hot in Florida. Having that environment with all the shade and all the trees and this amazing outlook and place to see is super important to everything I want to see at Epcot. Let's move on to World Nature. And on Thursday night, they surprised us by announcing Journey of Water, which is a Moana walkthrough attraction, which looks really cool. Now, this is another situation. This reminds me a bit of Pandora. And I know I may be making a stretch here. It may be a lot more specific, but the concept art that we saw during the panel and initially, it does have connections to Moana, but this is one of those cases where I feel like it just looks like a really impressive area that has a lot of trees, has a lot of water features, something that will be fun to go through with kids, not to be too much like Bob Chapek here in mentioning the word family 100 times. This is a walkthrough attraction. It's not an e-ticket. It appears to be headed somewhere near the seas, but if you can walk through that area, which in a sense is just kind of concrete and a little bit of water, and make this something really cool, I think that's a good thing. They're calling it magical living water, which makes me think of the jumping fountains near Imagination. If they're going to put Moana in Epcot, there are 100 different ways they could do it that would be worse. Now, it's one of those things where I think, do you really need Moana here? Because you can make just this amazing area and call it Journey of Water and have it be really impressive, connect to nature. But as long as they keep the connections to Moana subtle, I don't have a huge issue with it. I think that also could help with the situation where maybe in 5 or 10 years, for some people, Moana isn't as memorable. I thought Moana was amazing. It's one of my favorite recent Disney films. I thought the soundtrack was great. And so for me, if you're going to put a film in this area, it also kind of makes sense, given the message of Moana, to have it in this new area called World Nature. It doesn't make sense in Future World. So again, when we saw this announcement before they announced the switch to the neighborhoods, it made less sense. But now connecting into this kind of area of nature, it's okay with me. The other thing they mentioned is, of course, the film Awesome Planet. We got a date for that, which is in January 2020. I'm pumped about this. I don't think, again, it's going to be an earth-shattering experience, but I love going to my local science center for OmniMax films. Now, this isn't that level of screen, but I think something that is not tied, again, to a specific property and has things like space and the sea and everything, that would feel totally appropriate in Epcot Center and Epcot Now. So I think it's really cool that they're replacing an out-of-date environmental fable with The Lion King and putting something that I believe will be more modern. I expect it to be kind of on the level of like the Blue Planet series or something like that, but obviously in a theme park setting where it's a smaller film. So I think that's also going to be really cool to do that. And that's all we really heard about the nature area. Nothing about the Seas Pavilion, nothing else about the land, and I am okay with that. Yes, I would love it if they were removing Nemo and doing something different with the Living Seas, but there are worse options there. I've just kind of accepted that's not going to be my favorite attraction, but I'm really happy we didn't hear anything more about something happening with Living with the Land, especially because they recently just redid some of their videos for their screens, which I think is really cool. So I'm happy with that area, and the Moana edition, while not on the number one on my things I wanted to see, it's fine. I think it'll be good. So now let's move on to World Discovery. And of course, we did see more about Guardians of the Galaxy, the name, of course, being Cosmic Rewind. And again, this is another situation, like I mentioned, where the switch to Discovery makes it make more sense. They don't have to try and tie it to Future World. There was no mention during the panel of Peter Quill having come to Epcot Center, which was very smart because that would just look stupid. So I'm not going to talk too much about this. I think one thing that Bob Chapek mentioned is a reverse launch. And given how my stomach feels about the backward section of Expedition Everest and even part of it in Revenge of the Mummy, though not as much, I don't know if I love that, but I will say that it does fit with the name. And I think Disney will do the best they can with this. The pre-show rooms, the concept we saw for that looked really impressive. So I'm not super excited for this. I still don't feel like it really fits in Epcot. I've come to terms with it as much as I can, and I think it'll be a fun coaster. And under the idea of Discovery, it still doesn't totally fit, along with everything else, which mostly does. But hey, it's going to draw a lot of people to the park, and that will liven up that area even more. Something I'm more excited about is the Space Restaurant. We did get a shot of the elevator system, which is kind of like a super high-tech hydrolator, and I think that looks great. I love the idea of the view screen, so you're not just like going in something that simulates you shaking. It looks stunning. I almost feel like, could I just ride that elevator to the top and then leave without an ADR? I know that would never happen because they would have huge lines, but the restaurant's called Space 220, which connects to being 220 miles up from Earth. It'll have different views night and day, which is cool. I think that's going to be almost an impossible ADR to get. Maybe everyone isn't like me, but for me, the next time we're going, if we know 6 months out, actually, I'm just going to make an ADR when I think we might go the next time when it's open. I know you can't do that yet, but I think this restaurant, oh yeah, they might have food there too, but just the views and such, that looks like a home run for me as much as a restaurant can be. They also talked a little more about the Play Pavilion, which is in that area. We did see some shots of actually some of the things you're going to be doing. I got really nervous when during that Epcot film that I referenced, they showed a shot of Wreck-It Ralph, and I went, is there something surprising we're going to find out? Not really. There appears to be something in the Play Pavilion where you're doing a game with Wreck-It Ralph, in a sense. There's also an Edna Mode one where you're going to help get rid of uninspired style, and then a water balloon fight. All of this seems like just it's very Disney character focused from what I can tell. But if they're going to put all these things that are character focused in one spot and maybe keep characters out of hopefully Spaceship Earth, but Test Track, Mission Space, Living with the Land, some of the other areas, and you're going to put a bunch of character things in the Play Pavilion, sure, let's do it. And I am curious to see how that ends up looking overall. I think that'll be pretty cool. And one thing I also wanted to mention, which is something that we learned about a bit before, is the Walt Disney Imagineering Presents the Epcot Experience, which is in the Odyssey Pavilion. That looks fun. And I know it's really just a preview center. It's just a way to learn about a lot of this stuff. Unfortunately, it opens October 1st, where I was hoping it would open a little bit earlier because I would love to go through that. But I think preview centers are important, and getting people excited and also finding ways to just show more and have people experience it in person. And I think finding a way to use the Odyssey restaurant, pavilion, whatever you want to call it, in that way is really cool. Let's switch over to World Showcase now, which is described in the Disney Parks blog as a celebration of culture, cuisine, architecture, and traditions infused with new magic. Now, new magic really means characters, which we really had controversy when Anna and Elsa were put in for Maelstrom. That feels like about 100 years ago, even though that opened like 3 years ago. So you get to a situation now where it's like, can I get as riled up about this? It's so situational. I still don't like having Frozen in Norway. But now if we look at it, when they announced the big announcement for at least the panel was Mary Poppins coming to the United Kingdom Pavilion. This has been rumored for so long. And really what we learned is not that much. We did see some concept art of Cherry Tree Lane, and I did like seeing Admiral Boom's house. And then right next to it, of course, you have the Banks family house at number 17. And I apologize, I don't mean to just read the description, but that says something where we don't have that much information. A lot of the Mary Poppins presentation was a performance by some dancers of Step in Time, a heartwarming arrival of Dick Van Dyke. I think even Chapek might have been a little moved by it. I don't know. He's so corporate and robotic, I have to say, with the way he describes things. And I know it's not an easy job, but you saw when they brought on a lot of others to talk, including the guy who came on to talk about Epcot, who had so much energy and vitality. And then we went back to Bob. But when you talk about Mary Poppins, the rumors are that it's going to be a carousel. Now, they didn't mention that. I think that was purposeful. Rather, either they don't totally have everything in place yet because we didn't get a date for it, or it's more they want to excite us about Mary Poppins and then save you go into the house, this is where your journey begins, and then you get on a carousel. But still, I think it's cool. My daughters loved Mary Poppins Returns. They loved Mary Poppins originally. This was one of the bigger reactions that my daughter, who watched a lot of the videos with me, had to this. So I think it will likely be really successful. And I think it connects better than Anna and Elsa. And it's not, again, what I would say I'd love to see. But Mary Poppins is a great movie. And it deserves to have a place in a Disney park. And so if we put it here, I just hope they do a good job with the attraction, because the thought of just, they're going to put in a carousel to me sounds cheap. it doesn't sound like what it should be, which is an immersive dark ride. Even if it's not an e-ticket, something that really pays tribute to the film and does its characters justice. And I don't mean to talk just about rumors because nothing we learned today says that. So I just say that I hope that the attraction we get is something more than we might expect. We also learned a little bit more about Remy's Ratatouille Adventure. It's coming in summer of 2020, and they showed a few more concept art shots of it, even though it's already open in Paris. And like I've mentioned in the past, I think this is fine. I think putting it in the France Pavilion makes a lot of sense. Chapek did have a very odd statement where he talked about that it's a favorite pavilion, but it's soon going to be a family favorite, which kind of made me think, my girls like the French Pavilion. They enjoyed Impressions of France. I know Ratatouille might make it more, but hey, come on, Bob. Let's chill. And actually, he was mentioning that more about the Beauty and the Beast sing-along, which is not something I'm excited about, with apologies to Don Hahn, who's an amazing director and has done a lot of great things. This does not excite me. Yes, I am glad that Impressions of France is still playing, but I guarantee you the next time I go, which will be very soon, I am going to see Impressions of France because I still am not convinced that if this sing-along is a big hit, which it likely will be, that it eventually just doesn't become the full-time occupant and they don't shut down Impressions of France, or it becomes a situation where they start out as being about 50-50 and all of a sudden they're only showing Impressions of France twice. That is totally my opinion and is not something that I've heard anything about, but I could see it happening. I am excited about the fact that we're getting 2 new Circle Vision films. We learned a bit more. Now the China film is going to be called Wondrous China, and they again mentioned the completely seamless 360-degree format. And Canada, it's called Canada Far and Wide. And both of them really excite me. Both of them are coming in January 2020. Now, I think from what the description is saying too, that I'm not sure that the Canadian film is entirely new. I know it's going to have new scenes and a new story, but it may be a case where we still use some of the older shots, which is okay. I just love the fact that Disney is investing in some of the early Epcot films and making them newer and hopefully making them shine and be more popular. And so if they do a good job, I think that's great. Neither one mentioned anything. We didn't hear anything about Mulan going into the China film. So I'm going to assume, given how soon they are opening, that that's not the case. So I'm excited to see both of these. I think it's going to be cool for World Showcase. And it definitely takes a bit of the... It makes me feel a little better about the fact that we are adding Mary Poppins, adding another character attraction, that these attractions, and even Impressions of France to a lesser extent, are going to still be playing in Epcot and in World Showcase. I think that's really cool. And so overall, World Showcase still seems to be solid. I'm curious about what's going to happen with Mary Poppins and, of course, when Ratatouille opens next year. But for the most part, there was nothing about a few big bombshells that we were really expecting to hear from World Showcase. All right, so now some fun. Let's talk about things that we didn't hear anything about. The big one being we didn't hear about a Brazil pavilion, even though there was that funny tweet that came out where someone seemed to give away the fact that someone was working on a Brazil pavilion, and maybe that's still going to happen down the road. I know there's been a lot of unfortunate news about what's happening with the burning rainforest and such in Brazil and the way that country is handling it. Maybe Disney decided they wanted to wait. I don't know if it was that or the fact that it just seems like something they're going to do further down the road. They're doing so much with the transformation of Future World. Maybe this could be announced at Destination D next year or even looking further out at the D23 Expo 2 years from now. But it did surprise me a little bit. It seemed like a no-brainer, especially even when they put up those attraction posters and left a few to be revealed. I assumed one of those was Brazil, but it was not. We did not hear anything about it. So we are continuing the long time without a new pavilion in World Showcase. And that's disappointing to me. It's not just Brazil in general, though I would be interested to see what they would do. It's just I really was pumped about the idea of there being a new pavilion and World Showcase where the Imagineers and all the technology they can do now in creating immersive environments would tackle a country. And it's too bad because this was disappointing to me. I kept expecting it to come, and it just never did. We went through World Showcase, and really Disney focused on Mary Poppins as the big reveal. And I thought there would be another reveal, and there wasn't. The other big thing, which might even been more surprising given all the rumors that came out, is that nothing was said about the Imagination Pavilion. And part of me thinks, well, they could have done something really poor with it, so I guess that's okay. But in the other sense, I think, yeah, but it needs a lot of work. So the fact that they're not going to do something right now means the Pixar and Disney shorts are still going to play in that theater. We're still going to have the ImageWorks where a lot of things don't even work. You're still going to have the version of Journey into Imagination with Figment, which is cute. My daughters like it, but could be so much better. Even when they released those posters on Thursday night, the retro posters, and you saw a shot of Dreamfinder and Figment and a rainbow, it seemed to hint at the fact that perhaps we were getting something new at Imagination. I think it's going to happen at some point. I wonder if the pushback is going to be this would be something that would be announced down the road, and they don't want to announce it yet, and they could still save this for, again, Destination D or the next one, and still have it ready possibly for the 40th anniversary of Epcot in 2022. But this is a thing where they've had that same attraction in place, Journey into Imagination with Figment, longer than the original one now. And it's still crazy to me to think about that. So I was really expecting, the two biggest things I was expecting for Epcot were the Brazil Pavilion and an update to Journey into Imagination. And then behind that was, of course, Spaceship Earth, which I expected something to happen. And yes, Mary Poppins wasn't a shock. There were a lot of things like it was on, it was off, it was on, it was off. But still, the big things I expected didn't happen. The good news is they did replace them with some things that I think are cool. Not as much on the attraction side, more about the placemaking and theming, which is important. But I still think that with all this done, you still have a few spots that need help. The biggest one is Imagination. They are tackling the fact that Wonders of Life wasn't being used. They're doing some things in World Showcase. I think really, as you look beyond the 50th anniversary of Walt Disney World, I think anything big that was going to happen for the 50th anniversary has been announced. I think as you look to 2022 and especially 23 and beyond, when the transformation of Future World is complete, then I think Disney can look at that and say, okay, maybe we'll add this pavilion. But pavilion's a big expense, and I know they could maybe get the Brazilian government or another government, if they don't end up bringing Brazil, to pay some of it. But Disney, especially if we actually would go into a recession, which is really unfortunate, may not be willing to keep investing huge amounts of money. But something in Imagination might not be at that same expense. But in both cases, I think it would be a pretty significant update. So for Epcot, those are the two big things we didn't learn, but it still wasn't the worst thing. And before I turn the page from Epcot, I do need to mention that we did have some focus on the Nighttime Spectacular. We saw a little bit of Epcot Forever, and I'll admit that when they showed that clip where they had kids singing some of the songs, we heard Tomorrow's Child, we heard some other great songs from Epcot. It was really cool to see. And, it's one of those things where, again, Magic Journeys, they showed even a little clip with a kite flying around, which I believe is from that show. It was cool. And, of course, then we have the show coming next year, Harmonious. Oh, boy. And, I have been pretty positive about things overall, but that is a pretty stupid name. I'm sure I'll get used to it. Maybe I would not have thought that Illuminations was the best name originally, but Harmony and then the us capitalized, it's just like, really? Really? Okay. But Bob Chapek did describe this as the biggest nighttime spectacular they've ever done. It's described as featuring massive floating set pieces and choreographed moving fountains, lights, pyrotechnics, lasers, more. It's probably going to be spectacular. I understand they need to replace Illuminations. I think something new would be cool. That's fine. This still gives me pause. I think it's going to be grand and epic, probably much more so than what we have now. And they're going to really push the characters. It was described as kind of focusing more on the music, but it said Disney music. So obviously Epcot Forever is more Epcot music, and that's going to lead into this spectacular with Disney music. For now, I guess I'm going to take a wait and see approach and just assume that it's going to be impressive and think that I'll be curious about what Epcot Forever ends up being compared to this massive undertaking they're taking, which is going to start next year. I'm starting to think that perhaps I should have just talked about Epcot because that was enough for a full podcast. So I'm going to speed up the pace a little bit with how much I talk about some of the other changes. First of all, we did learn some more about the Star Wars Hotel, Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser. And part of me thinks I grew up as a huge Star Wars fan. We watched the original film so many times as kids and a lot of times with the next two. I still love Star Wars, but I don't think I'm ever going to stay in this hotel. If the prices that we've seen thus far remain, it's just insane. And while I'm really intrigued by the role-playing gaming aspect of it, I think I'm going to be viewing it from afar. And if anyone takes YouTube videos and writes stories about it and people that get to go for free and all of that, I am not going to end up there anytime soon. I think it's so ambitious from Disney, and I admire that to a point, but I also kind of look at it and go, is this going to work? Could they really do this? Can it work? And if it can, hey, more power to them. One thing that I thought that was cool, speaking of Star Wars, is we did get more footage of Rise of the Resistance. Yes, it was commercial promotional footage, so it's changed up a bit, but it still looks super impressive. We saw some of the shots you'd expect, like the AT-AT shot or all the stormtroopers in the massive spot inside the Star Destroyer. A little bit more of being on the ride vehicle and some things that are happening there. Everything that I saw looks super impressive. I think Rise of the Resistance will likely be an epic, cool e-ticket attraction if they can get it to work right. Because obviously it's been delayed a lot, but the footage we saw still looked very impressive. And that's pretty much it with Disney's Hollywood Studios. We saw a bit more. We did see the ride vehicles for Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, which looked really cute. I like it. It's like a little train car. I think that attraction, again, if they can get the technology to work correctly, is going to be a lot of fun and very impressive. So that excites me too, to see a little bit more of that. We also know that's going to be opening in Disneyland down the road. So we did see the facade of that. And that's something that is going to be cool there in the Toontown area. It's opening at Hollywood Studios in spring 2020. We basically heard nothing significant about Disney's Animal Kingdom. There had been a ton of rumors that it would get a new attraction that was coming out a lot before the D23 Expo, especially given that Primeval Whirl has been closed for indefinitely and may not reopen again ever. And that didn't come up at all. So I'm curious about that side of it. Maybe it's just a situation where you can only do so many things. You only want to announce so much. Maybe something gets announced down the road. Maybe they haven't totally settled on what they're doing. But regardless, nothing new from the Animal Kingdom. The main thing from the Magic Kingdom is we know the name of Tron. It's called the Tron Light Cycle Run. I guess it's not as powerful. I don't know. They got rid of power, but we heard that name and that came out. So they did show a few shots of the vehicles, but it was a very quick look. And again, I came into this, I know I did a blog post where I talked about what I wanted to see for Epcot, but I was kind of thinking about this more. I talked about this a little bit on my Tomorrow Society Bulletin podcast for members. I expected to hear more about the 50th anniversary. This is the last D23 Expo before the 50th anniversary. And yes, maybe they could say something. In 2 years, they will obviously focus on that. But all I can think of is that Destination D next year, maybe we'll have a lot about the 50th anniversary, because we've heard so much about how there were going to be so many upgrades around the 50th anniversary and beyond. Whether all the different rumors we've heard about Tiki Room and Country Bears and Carousel of Progress, some of those obviously have been debunked, but you got the idea with Big Thunder Mountain Railroad or the 50 for the 50th, all these things. Nothing from that. I mean, there were mentions of the 50th anniversary, but we didn't hear anything like that from Bob Chapek. And that really makes me wonder. I assume some of these things will get announced. Maybe they'll have a situation where they'll start announcing them just on the blog or at other speeches. There are other events where these could happen. But I thought we'd get some glimpses at some of the changes that are going to be coming for the 50th anniversary, some upgrades to attractions. And nope. Nothing there. It's really stunning that was the case. And I was surprised by it. And I think a lot of people were that we didn't find out more about that. We did hear about the new Cirque du Soleil show, which is opening next March. And it is themed to animation. So it's really more focused on Disney itself. Imagineering worked on it. They even brought out an older animator to come in and talk about it. And they spent a lot of time on this presentation. And that's when you start to think about it. It's like they only have so much time, and they spent almost 10 minutes on the Cirque du Soleil show, which I am sure will be great. But I'm kind of looking at it going, come on, more park stuff. And I know Disney Springs is very important to what Disney is doing. Cirque du Soleil show, especially having it be more Disney, more family, as Bob Chapek would say about Epcot. That's interesting to me, but I don't think we'll be going to see it because it is quite expensive. And I think maybe that's not the way I want to spend my time and money when I'm there, but it still does interest me in a sense. So another thing about Florida is they showed a bit more about Reflections, the Disney Lakeside Lodge. I'm not a DVC member. I think there'll be some cool stuff in it. The theming has started to look a bit better, not as generic as before. So, hey, it's great that they're using that area that hasn't been used for a long time where River Country was. It's a hotel. So I will be curious about it when it opens and some of the things they're putting in there. But it's pretty limited for me at this point as to how much I am interested in Reflections, a Disney Lakeside Lodge. And so one thing I would mention is they are going to have a restaurant themed to The Princess and the Frog, which I think is kind of cool and is going to excite fans of that film. It's interesting that it's going there versus Port Orleans, but it makes sense they're trying to find a way to really attract people to that resort. The last big thing I wanted to talk about is all the Marvel editions that are going into DCA and Disneyland Paris. Now, I especially want to focus on DCA because I'm much more likely to get there. They did show some more information about the Marvel Hotel that is being rethemed in Paris, which looked pretty neat. But a lot of the attention during this was on the Avengers Campus, which is opening at DCA sometime next year. And I'm so all over the map on this one. In one sense, it's so weird to me now that they are putting in a Spider-Man attraction after the news this week that Spider-Man will no longer be part of the MCU. Now, obviously, Spider-Man has showed up in enough films already, 5 movies if you count the 2 Avengers films plus Captain America Civil War. So it's not like Spider-Man is not already pretty well connected with Marvel and with the movies, but it's really interesting to me. And so as we look closer at this Avengers Campus, they really focused on the idea that you are part of the story and you are experiencing this to make it as interactive as possible. The concept art for this land looks very large. It looks pretty impressive. Grand scale, the whole deal. But the Spider-Man attraction itself still doesn't excite me that much. Now, the premise of it is you're going to the Worldwide Engineering Brigade, which is known as WEB, of course, and that's where you get encounter some new inventions from Spider-Man or from Peter Parker. You get in this web slinger vehicle, and there are these little, basically spider bots, which remind me, if you're a fan of Stargate SG-1, they remind me a lot of the replicators in a sense, because the spider bots end up replicating and causing problems. Something goes horribly wrong, and of course you need to help. An interactive attraction on the surface where you help out Spider-Man and shoot webs. That sounds great. That sounds fun. They showed the ride vehicles though, and it almost looks like this is a high-tech version of Toy Story Mania a bit, where it seems to be that you are staring out across a screen and you are shooting webs and things are happening around you. Now, until we really experience it, I can only speculate. And I think that it will likely be a very fun attraction. And I know a lot of people are really excited about this. When I talked to Lou Mangello, this was the thing he was most excited about anything that is coming up for Disney, which tells you something that he is a big Spider-Man fan. But another thing on this campus too is you have, which this one's kind of hit with the thud, I feel like, at the panel, the PIM Test Kitchen, which is basically a restaurant, and I heard it was a microbrewery, but that wasn't brought up on the panel, that themed to Ant-Man and the Wasp. Hey, it's great that Ant-Man and the Wasp get to do something, though it is a restaurant. And I know there's going to be some interesting things there with large food, possibly in the lobby area when you walk in. I don't think you're actually going to be eating super small or large food, but maybe it'll allow them to have some pretty clever things there. There's also some type of special Doctor Strange meet and greet. I couldn't tell if that was just a show. Remember there was a case where people had heard that Doctor Strange would be doing a show in the middle of Epcot Center, kind of in that spine area, the World Celebration area. Maybe that's happening here, or maybe this is just kind of like your Ariel's Grotto, but its own area with Doctor Strange. It seems something a little bit different than just your typical area. There seem to be a lot of characters you're going to be able to meet here, which is something that I know excite people like Black Widow and Ant-Man and the Wasp, and of course, people from Wakanda and Iron Man. I mean, a lot of people. So that's something that seems to be pretty impressive. And the facade also of the Avengers headquarters seems pretty neat. So I suspect that the buildings and the way everything comes together are going to be impressive. And I think that's great. I think DCA in that corner, it fits along also with Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. So you have that corner of the park. Now, I don't know exactly how this really fits with California Adventure, but I'm suspecting this is the Avengers campus in California, and the other one is the Avengers campus in Paris. So I guess that sort of fits, maybe, but regardless, this will be a big draw, and some of it opening in 2020, that you have people going to Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland, and then this is on the completely opposite end of the resort, on the other end of DCA. And of course, they mentioned something that I had not heard about before, which is a Wakanda attraction, which appears to be some sort of roller coaster, I believe. It's described as an e-ticket attraction. You're going to board a Quinjet. You're going to go to Wakanda. There's going to be a big fight there. The concept art showed basically a bunch of Avengers. You see Captain Marvel and the Hulk and everyone in this crazy fight. And the ride vehicles, I didn't totally understand. They call it an innovative ride system. So is this a roller coaster? Is this a simulator? I was under the impression it would be a coaster, but I could be entirely wrong. Maybe this is something else. Regardless, this seems to be a very high-tech, big-budget attraction. It's going to be part of Phase 2 in that area, though, so it will not open next year, but it's going to be something that's really going to excite a lot of people, I suspect. Another thing happened in Disneyland is what I think is the worst parade name I've almost ever seen, which is Magic Happens, which is, you cannot hear that and not think of another phrase that involves happens. But it's basically a daytime parade. It's going to include a lot of Disney characters that you know, like Moana and others. And it's going to be impressive, I'm sure. Big budget. Looks like they're putting a lot into it. It's probably going to be very cool. But the name, oh boy, the name. That's all I can say. I know they're pushing magic. That's what Disney does. I understand that most names of parades are stupid, but this seems to be up there with one of the dumber names of a parade. There's also going to be floats for Coco and Sleeping Beauty. I think it's going to be fun, but it is a daytime parade, so I have probably spent more time than I need to say about it. But hey, they're investing in a new parade during the day at Disneyland. They're investing in entertainment. It's hard to explain. It's hard to complain too much about that overall. And so they're still doing a lot in California. Now, before I kind of step off of this, it's hard for me to get super pumped about Marvel editions in California, and I'm not entirely sure why. I'm a big fan of the Marvel movies. I recently just saw Spider-Man Far From Home and enjoyed it. There have been very few of them that I thought were total duds. So putting them in the parks, though, for some reason, I'm just kind of like, okay. I mean, they talked about this for a while, and granted, the stuff about the campus and how all of that worked was a little confusing to me. But overall, I just find myself not being as inspired by it as I feel like I should be. And I suspect this could just be a situation where when I get there, I'm really impressed, because there have been cases like Pandora where I kind of had like, well, maybe it'll be cool. And I went there and I was like, this place is incredible. So that may be the case here too. But it's just hard to get that enthused about this, despite the fact that they're investing huge amounts of money and capital. And I know they're going to make these well-themed attractions. It just doesn't feel as original to me as the things I really want to see out of Disney. And overall, I'm pretty pumped about what's going on with a lot of things here at the Expo. But even though the Black Panther attraction sounds great, and that excites me more than Spider-Man, I'm still a little lukewarm about it overall. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm sure as I learn more, it'll be different. And I did want to mention, before we kind of start to wrap this up, that Disney announced something new called a Disney Genie, which it looks a lot like touring plans, where they're talking about optimizing your day and such. And I know touring plans does not just do things like, I want to have a day of a princess, or I want to have a day of adventure, or for foodies at Epcot. And my Disney experience does not have a good track record. So the fact that Disney is now trying to put together an app, a technology thing to help with planning, we'll wait and see. We'll see what happens. This one is one of those things where I think, kind of like my Disney experience, it has its uses. You know, it can be helpful for bus times and fast passes and show times and such, or mobile orders, great. And I suspect this will have its own things that are exciting, but I'm definitely taking a wait and see approach with the Disney Genie. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed getting some of my thoughts about the D23 Expo and a lot of the announcements that Disney made at their latest fan convention. I didn't even mention the fact that they announced the 5th cruise ship and the whole new area for the cruise line to go. I felt like there is so much in that vein, and I'm not an expert there, so I'm going to let the cruise line experts really talk about that area. But it's been fun to really dig into what they're talking about with Epcot and some of the other changes. Overall, I feel like there was nothing that made me just think this is the worst thing ever. There are things that I think will be very cool in the parks. I was surprised by some of the changes that didn't get announced, and I wonder about that a lot. But I think that many of the changes are going to be positive for the parks and the overall transformation of Epcot. I'm more intrigued now than I was before. I have a few reservations, but I'm not ready to just, never visit the park again because of it. I think there's going to be a lot more to unpack in the days, weeks, and months ahead. So if you like this podcast, you can, of course, check out all of my older episodes at tomorrowsociety.com. And, of course, you can leave a rating and review through Apple Podcasts or your other preferred podcast provider. And if you are wanting to find a way to support the podcast, you can go to tomorrowsociety.com/member, where you can become an official member of the Tomorrow Society and receive some really cool perks through Patreon, including access to the Tomorrow Society Bulletin, which is a monthly podcast, which is kind of like this, where I just talk about my thoughts about what's going on at the park's history, and especially looking towards the future. It's a lot of fun, and I always love connecting with people that are fans of this podcast. One other thing I wanted to mention is I am going to be in Walt Disney World on September 6th and September 7th to see Galaxy's Edge and catch up with some things that I have not visited yet, like Toy Story Land, and I haven't ridden Flight of Passage, and I also want to see Illuminations one more time. I'm not doing any type of official meetup when I'm there, but if you are going to be in the parks during that time and you want to meet up for a few minutes and just say hi and talk for a bit about what's going on with the parks, shoot me a note. You can follow me on Twitter at TomorrowSOC or Facebook or Instagram at Tomorrow Society. You can also email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Let me know you're going to be in the area and let's connect. It would be really fun. The Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I am going to be talking with Tom K. Morris, a former Imagineer who worked on some amazing attractions, including Journey into Imagination and World of Motion, plus Fantasyland. He was the show producer of Fantasyland at Disneyland Paris and worked on Cars Land and DCA. And he's also a big fan of the Haunted Mansion, and we dig into thoughts on the 50th anniversary. So that was a really fun conversation that I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for listening to this D23 Expo show, and I will talk to you again very soon.